picture this. You're standing in a room full of the most advanced beings in the universe. Creatures with technology that can bend reality, species that have conquered death itself, and civilizations that have mastered time and space.
Yet when they speak of humans, their voices drop to whispers. Not because we're weak, but because we possess something that makes even gods nervous.
What could possibly make beings of unimaginable power fear a species that still argues about what to have for dinner? The answer isn't what you think. It's not our weapons, our technology, or our numbers. It's something far more terrifying. Something that lies dormant in every single human being, waiting for the right moment to emerge.
This is the story of Sarah Chen, an ordinary librarian from Portland, who discovered that humanity's greatest terror isn't what we've become, it's what we're capable of becoming when everything else falls away. When the universe itself conspired to test the limits of human potential, Sarah's journey would reveal why advanced civilizations across the galaxy have one universal rule: never ever corner a human being.
What you're about to read will challenge everything you believe about strength, about survival, and about the incredible power that sleeps within ordinary people. Because sometimes, the most terrifying force in the universe isn't the darkness between stars. It's the light that refuses to go out in the human heart.
Sarah Chen had always believed that extraordinary things happen to extraordinary people. At 32, she lived a life so routine that she could predict her day down to the minute.
Wake up at 6:15 a.m., coffee with 2 sugars, walk 12 blocks to the Portland Central Library where she worked as a research librarian, and spend her days helping people find answers to questions they couldn't solve alone. Tuesday, March 15th started like any other day.
The spring rain tapped against her apartment window as she prepared for work, completely unaware that in approximately 4 hours and 23 minutes everything she thought she knew about human beings would be shattered forever. The first sign something was wrong came at 10:43 a.m. when every electronic device in the library simultaneously shut down.
Not just powered off, but completely dead, as if something had drained every battery and severed every connection in an instant. Sarah looked up from the rare books section where she was cataloging 18th century maritime journals, watching as confused patrons stared at their blank phone screens. Then the sky changed. Outside the tall windows of the library, what had been a typical overcast Oregon morning transformed into something that belonged in a science fiction movie.
The clouds didn't just part, they seemed to fold in on themselves, creating geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. And through those impossible openings in the sky, Sarah could see stars. Not the faint dots visible on clear nights, but brilliant points of light that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. Marcus Webb, a regular patron who spent his retirement researching local history, stood beside Sarah at the window. His weathered face reflected the strange light from above as he whispered, "In 40 years of studying atmospheric phenomena, I've never seen anything like this." What they couldn't see from their vantage point was happening simultaneously across the entire planet.
In Tokyo, businessmen watched the same impossible sky from their office towers. In London, children playing in Hyde Park pointed upward in wonder and fear.
In Sao Paulo, scientists at the observatory frantically tried to make sense of readings that defied every law of physics they knew. The silence that followed was perhaps the most unsettling part. Portland was a city that hummed with constant noise, traffic, construction, the distant sound of the river. But now, an otherworldly quiet had settled over everything, broken only by the sound of human voices asking questions no one could answer. Sarah's training as a librarian had taught her to remain calm in the face of confusion, to methodically search for information when others panicked. She moved through the library, checking on the elderly patrons and helping parents comfort frightened children. What struck her most was how quickly people began to organize themselves without any official direction. Mrs. Patterson, a retired nurse, immediately began checking if anyone needed medical attention. James Rodriguez, a local mechanic, started investigating why the emergency lighting systems had failed along with everything else. By noon, it became clear that the strange phenomenon wasn't limited to the sky. Reports began filtering in through the few working radios that people had retrieved from their cars, old models that seemed mysteriously unaffected. Around the world, people were experiencing something unprecedented, not just the visual disturbance in the atmosphere, but a feeling. A sensation that something vast and incomprehensibly alien was paying attention to Earth. Dr. Elena Vasquez, an astrophysicist from the nearby university who had taken shelter in the library when her car died, managed to get her grandfather's old transistor radio working. Through waves of static, they caught fragments of broadcasts from around the globe. The International Space Station had gone silent. Military installations were reporting total equipment failure, yet strangely no one was hurt. No planes had fallen from the sky, no hospitals had lost power to critical systems.
It was as if whatever was causing this phenomenon had taken care to avoid immediate harm to human life.
As the afternoon wore on, Sarah noticed something remarkable happening among the people gathered in the library. Without phones to distract them, without the constant buzz of modern technology, people were talking to each other.
Really talking, miss.
Chen, the elderly Chinese woman who visited daily to read newspapers in her native language, was teaching origami to a group of teenagers who would normally never have looked up from their devices. Mr. Thompson, a veteran who usually sat alone in the history section, was sharing stories with young parents about how communities had functioned during power outages in the past. But it was around 3:30 p.m. when Sarah first felt it, the thing that would change her understanding of what it meant to be human. It started as a warmth in her chest, different from anything she'd ever experienced. Not the flush of embarrassment or the heat of anger, but something deeper. Like a sleeping part of herself was slowly waking up. She was helping organize a makeshift childcare area when little Emma Nguyen, barely 6 years old, tugged on her sleeve. "Miss Sarah," the child said, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. "I can feel the scared people." Sarah knelt down to the girl's level. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "The people outside. The ones who are really scared. I can feel them in my tummy, like when I'm worried, but it's not my worry." Emma's small hand pressed against her stomach. "And there's something else, something big and far away. But it's looking at us. Not mean looking, but careful looking." Before Sarah could respond, she realized she felt it too. Not just Emma's fear, but a sense of the emotional state of people throughout the building. The teenage boy by the windows was trying to act brave but was terrified about his family. Mrs. Patterson was worried but determined to help others, and underneath it all, something else. A presence that felt vast and ancient and intensely curious. Dr. Webb, who had been listening, sat down beside them. "Young lady," he said to Emma, "can you tell me more about this feeling? Is it like hearing something or seeing something?" "It's like knowing something," Emma replied with the simple honesty that children possess. "Like when you know someone is behind you before you turn around, but bigger." As the strange day progressed, more people began reporting similar experiences. Enhanced awareness of others' emotions, sudden insights into problems they'd been struggling with for years, and strangest of all, a growing sense of connection not just to each other, but to something far beyond Earth's atmosphere. Sarah found herself becoming an unofficial coordinator, not because she'd appointed herself to the role, but because others naturally turned to her for guidance. Her years of helping people find information had taught her to listen carefully, to ask the right questions, and to remain calm under pressure. But now those skills seemed heightened, as if her ability to understand what people needed had been amplified beyond normal human capacity. By evening, as the impossible sky began to take on deeper hues that had no name in any human language, Sarah realized that whatever was happening was far from over. The strange phenomena weren't random or chaotic. They felt purposeful, like the opening moves in a test that humanity was only beginning to understand. As she helped arrange sleeping areas for those who couldn't or wouldn't risk traveling home in the strange conditions, Sarah caught a reflection in one of the library's dark windows. For just a moment, she could have sworn her eyes held a light that hadn't been there that morning. Not a reflection, but something from within. The last thing she remembered before falling into an exhausted sleep on a makeshift bed of library cushions was the feeling that tomorrow would bring changes that would make today's impossibilities seem simple by comparison. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a thought that didn't feel entirely like her own whispered that this was exactly what someone, or something, had been waiting to see. Outside, the stars continued their impossible dance across the folded sky, while 7 billion human beings slept fitfully, unaware that they were about to discover what had made advanced civilizations across the galaxy speak their name in whispers for millennia. Sarah woke before dawn to the sound of singing. Not the cheerful morning songs of birds, but human voices harmonizing in a melody she'd never heard before, yet somehow knew by heart. She sat up on her makeshift bed in the library, disoriented for a moment before the events of the previous day came flooding back. The impossible sky, the failed technology, the strange new awareness that had settled over everyone like a warm blanket. Following the sound, she found its source on the library's main floor. About 30 people had gathered in a circle, their voices creating something beautiful and haunting.
"Mrs. Davis is sped bester."
Chen, who spoke limited English, was singing in perfect harmony with teenagers she'd never met, while Dr. Webb's deep baritone blended seamlessly with little Emma's clear soprano. None of them seemed to know where the melody had come from, but they all knew it. "It started about an hour ago," whispered James Rodriguez, the mechanic she'd met yesterday. He was standing at the edge of the group, tears streaming down his weathered face. Maria, my wife. She passed 3 years ago. But I swear, I can hear her voice in that music. Sarah felt it too. Not just the melody, but the emotions behind it. Grief transformed into something beautiful. Loneliness becoming connection. Fear blooming into hope. Whatever was happening to them was accelerating, becoming stronger with each passing hour. As the sun rose, painting the folded sky in colors that shouldn't exist, people began sharing stories that defied explanation. Mrs. Patterson reported that her arthritis pain had completely disappeared overnight. A college student named David Kim discovered he could understand and speak languages he'd never learned. Most unsettling of all, several people claimed they were receiving information directly into their minds, not thoughts exactly, but knowledge that simply appeared when they needed it. Sarah was organizing the morning meal distribution when Dr. Elena Vasquez approached her. The astrophysicist's face pale with excitement and fear. "I need to show you something," Elena said, leading Sarah to a quiet corner where she'd set up her grandfather's radio. "I've been monitoring frequencies all night," Elena explained. "Most communication satellites are still down, but I'm picking up transmissions." "Not from Earth, Sarah. These signals are coming from space and they're not random." She adjusted the radio's frequency, and through the static came a series of tones that sounded almost musical.
Listen to the pattern, Elena said.
"It's complex, but there's definitely structure. And here's the strange part. When I concentrate on the sounds, I almost understand them. Like they're designed to be interpreted by human consciousness specifically." Sarah listened, and Elena was right. The alien sounds seemed to bypass her ears entirely, creating meaning directly in her mind. Images flashed through her consciousness, vast ships moving between stars, beings of incredible advancement, and most disturbing of all, other worlds where similar events had taken place. Worlds where the inhabitants had been tested, evaluated, and found wanting. "What happened to them?" Sarah asked, though she somehow already knew the answer. "They failed," Elena whispered. "Whatever this is, it's happened before. Many times. And not everyone passed the test." By mid-morning, it became clear that the changes weren't limited to enhanced awareness and strange new abilities. People were physically transforming as well. Nothing dramatic or frightening, but subtle improvements that were impossible to ignore. Sarah noticed her own vision becoming sharper, her hearing more acute. She could see individual raindrops falling from incredible distances and hear conversations happening several blocks away. Dr. Webb, who had been documenting everything with scientific precision, made an observation that sent chills through everyone who heard it. "The changes aren't random," he said, addressing the growing crowd that had gathered to share their experiences. "Every enhancement, every new ability, they're all focused on the same thing. Increasing our capacity for connection, understanding, and problem solving. Whatever is doing this to us is optimizing us for something." It was then that Emma approached Sarah again, the 6-year-old's face serious beyond her years. "Miss Sarah, they want to talk to you." "Who wants to talk to me, sweetheart?" "The Watchers," Emma said simply. "They've been deciding, and they think you might be ready." Before Sarah could ask what that meant, the world around her shifted. Not physically. The library remained exactly as it was, but her perception expanded beyond anything she thought possible. Suddenly, she could sense not just the people in the building, but the entire city. Millions of minds, all undergoing the same transformation, all connected by threads of awareness that were becoming stronger by the hour. And beyond that, impossibly distant but growing closer, she felt them. The Watchers Emma had mentioned, beings of such advanced consciousness that trying to comprehend them was like a candle attempting to understand the sun. Yet somehow, through the growing network of human awareness, communication was possible. The contact came not as words, but as pure understanding flooding her mind. "You are the third species to reach this threshold in this galactic cycle. The others chose paths that led to stagnation or destruction. Your species shows interesting potential." Sarah found herself responding without knowing how. "What do you want from us?" "To see what you become when the limitations are removed. Your kind has always possessed remarkable potential, but you have been constrained by your biology, your technology, your assumptions about reality. We have temporarily lifted those constraints." Images flashed through her consciousness, humans throughout history performing impossible feats under extreme stress. Mothers lifting cars to save their children, people surviving in conditions that should have killed them, Individuals making leaps of intuition that advance science by centuries. All examples of humans briefly accessing capabilities that normally lay dormant. But this is dangerous, Sarah realized. If we're not ready, yes. Power without wisdom leads to destruction. This is why the test exists. Some species use their awakened abilities to conquer, to dominate, to consume. They fail. Others retreat into passivity, overwhelmed by their new awareness. They also fail. What would success look like? The answer came as a vision. Humanity spread across the stars, not as conquerors but as gardeners, helping younger civilizations develop, protecting and nurturing life wherever it was found. Humans who had learned to balance incredible power with deep wisdom, who could reshape reality itself while never forgetting their responsibility to others. How long do we have? The transformation will be complete in 7 of your days. By then your species will have become what it will be for the next phase of its existence. Choose wisely. The connection faded, leaving Sarah gasping as her awareness snapped back to the confines of her own body. She found herself surrounded by concerned faces, but she could see in their eyes that many of them had experienced something similar. The test wasn't just for her, it was for all of humanity. Dr. Vasquez was the first to speak. I felt it too. We all did, to varying degrees. Whatever those beings are, they're not our enemies, but they're not our friends either. They're evaluators. Over the next few hours, reports flooded in from around the world through the growing network of human consciousness. Governments were struggling to respond to a situation that no protocol had anticipated. Some world leaders were calling for military responses to what they saw as an invasion, while others recognized that traditional power structures meant nothing in the face of what was happening. But among ordinary people, something extraordinary was emerging. Communities were self-organizing with unprecedented efficiency. Problems that had seemed intractable for decades were being solved in hours by groups of people working with enhanced awareness and connection. Resource distribution, conflict resolution, even complex scientific research. Everything was accelerating as human consciousness evolved. Sarah realized she had become something like an unofficial ambassador between the awakening human network and the watching entities. Throughout the day, she received more communications, each one revealing additional layers of the test humanity was undergoing. The entities, she learned, belonged to what they called the Confluence, a galactic community of species that had successfully navigated their own transformations. They served as guardians and guides, but also as judges. Not every species that showed potential was ready for the responsibilities that came with advanced consciousness. As evening fell and the impossible sky took on new configurations, Sarah gathered with the others in the library to share what she'd learned. The room fell silent as she explained the nature of their test, the examples of other species that had succeeded or failed, and the timeline they were working with. 7 days, she concluded. In 7 days, we'll be locked into whatever we become. The question is, what do we want that to be? The discussion that followed lasted deep into the night. People shared their visions of humanity's potential future, their fears about the changes they were experiencing, and their hopes for what their children might become. But underlying all of it was a growing sense of unity, a recognition that despite their differences, they were all part of something larger than themselves. As Sarah finally settled down to sleep, she realized that tomorrow would bring even greater challenges. The transformation was accelerating, and with it both the opportunities and the dangers. Some humans would undoubtedly try to use their new abilities for personal gain or domination. Others might be paralyzed by the magnitude of what was happening. The fate of the entire species hung in the balance. And Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her role in determining that fate was far from over. In her dreams that night, she saw glimpses of possible futures. Humanity ascending to join the galactic community as wise guardians, or burning itself out in conflicts that would make previous wars look like children's games. When she woke, she would have only 5 days left to help tip the balance toward the future where humanity deserved to survive its own potential. The 3rd day brought humanity's first taste of what the Watchers truly feared. Sarah woke to the sound of distant explosions and the acrid smell of smoke drifting through the library's ventilation system. Outside, Portland's skyline was marred by columns of black smoke rising from the industrial district. But more disturbing than the physical destruction was what she could sense through the growing network of human consciousness, islands of cruel joy, minds drunk on newfound power and the suffering of others. It's starting in the major cities. Dr. Vasquez reported, her face grim as she monitored emergency broadcasts. Enhanced individuals are forming factions. Some are trying to establish dominance over those whose abilities manifested more slowly.
Sarah felt the truth of it through her connection to the network.
In New York, a group calling themselves the Ascended had taken over 3 city blocks using their enhanced abilities to dominate normal humans who hadn't yet experienced significant changes. In London, a former corporate executive named Harrison Gray had gathered followers and declared himself humanity's first evolutionary leader. Similar patterns were emerging worldwide. People who saw their new abilities as proof of their right to rule others.
But for every mind that chose domination, Sarah could sense dozens that were moving in the opposite direction. Teachers were using enhanced empathy to reach troubled students in ways that seemed miraculous. Doctors were diagnosing illnesses with intuitive accuracy that defied medical explanation. Emergency workers were coordinating rescue efforts with a level of efficiency that was saving hundreds of lives.
It's a spectrum, Mrs. Chen observed in her careful English, now somehow perfectly fluent despite having struggled with the language for years. Some people see gift, think only of self. Others see gift, think of everyone.
The Watchers confirmed this observation when they contacted Sarah again, their communication tinged with what she could only interpret as concern. This is the critical phase. Power reveals character, does not create it. Those who would abuse these gifts were already predisposed to such behavior. The question is whether your species can prevent them from defining humanity's path. Sarah found herself asking the question that had been haunting her. How have other species handled this phase? The answer came as a flood of tragic images, worlds where the enhanced individuals had enslaved their unenhanced populations, civilizations that had turned their new abilities toward conquest, strip mining entire star systems before burning out in wars of mutual annihilation. Species that had fragmented into competing factions, each believing their particular manifestation of enhanced consciousness, made them superior to all others. The Kythera achieved incredible technological advancement but lost all capacity for empathy. They now exist in perfect isolation, each individual convinced of their own supremacy. The Veltard gained the ability to manipulate matter at will but used it only to create weapons of increasing sophistication.
They destroyed themselves in a war that lasted exactly 17 minutes. But there were successes too.
Sarah pressed.
Few, but yes. The Kethanari learned to see their enhancement as responsibility rather than privilege. The Morali developed a culture where increased ability automatically meant increased obligation to serve others. These species now help guide the confluence, but they are rare. Most fail this test. The conversation was interrupted by commotion outside the library. Through the windows, Sarah could see a crowd gathering in the street, their postures aggressive and threatening. At their center stood a man she recognized, Marcus Holloway, a former city councilman who had been caught embezzling funds 2 years earlier. His political career had ended in disgrace, but now he stood radiating an aura of confidence and power that was literally visible to enhanced perception.
"Citizens of Portland," Holloway called out, his voice carrying impossible distances without amplification. "The old world has ended.
The weak institutions that once pretended to govern us are obsolete. It's time for those with true capability to take their rightful place as leaders of humanity's next phase."
Sarah felt the ugly hunger beneath his words, the way his enhanced charisma was designed to manipulate the fear and uncertainty that many people were feeling. Several individuals in the crowd were beginning to nod, drawn by his promises of security and purpose under strong leadership.
But she also sensed something else, the growing response from enhanced individuals throughout the city who recognized the danger Holloway represented. A network of quiet resistance was forming, people who understood that their new abilities came with responsibility rather than privilege. Dr. Webb, who had been observing the scene with scientific detachment, made an observation that chilled Sarah to the bone.
"Look at their eyes," he said quietly. "Holloway's followers. There's something wrong with them." Sarah focused her enhanced vision and immediately understood what he meant. The people who had most enthusiastically embraced Holloway's message showed signs of corruption. Their auras, visible to enhanced perception, were shot through with dark veins that pulsed with each demonstration of their abilities. It was as if the power itself was somehow poisoning those who used it for selfish purposes.
When she shared this observation through the network, the Watcher's response was immediate and alarmed. "The contamination has begun earlier than expected. This is troubling. Contamination. Power without wisdom creates a feedback loop. Each selfish use of enhanced abilities makes the next selfish act easier, more attractive. Eventually, the individual becomes incapable of considering others' well-being. It is a form of spiritual cancer that spreads through communities if not contained. How do we stop it? You cannot stop it in those already affected, but you can prevent it from spreading by demonstrating a different path." Sarah understood what the Watchers were asking of her. and the weight of it nearly drove her to her knees. She and others like her would have to serve as examples, using their growing abilities only in service of others, even when selfish use would be easier and more immediately rewarding. Over the next several hours, the crisis escalated.
Holloway's faction grew larger and more aggressive, while similar groups in other cities began coordinating their efforts. Reports came in of enhanced individuals using their abilities to rob banks, to manipulate stock markets, to blackmail those who couldn't defend themselves against psychic intrusion.
But the resistance grew as well. Sarah found herself at the center of a different kind of network, people who had made a conscious choice to use their abilities responsibly. Teachers who were healing trauma in their students instead of manipulating them. Scientists who were sharing breakthrough discoveries freely rather than hoarding them for personal gain. Emergency workers who were saving lives at great personal cost. The contrast became stark when Holloway's group attempted to take over the library, viewing it as a symbolic target and believing the people there would be easy to dominate. They arrived in force, their enhanced abilities making them seem invincible to normal human resistance. But they hadn't anticipated what they would face. Sarah stood in the library's main entrance as Holloway approached, his followers spreading out behind him in a formation designed to intimidate. Up close, she could see the full extent of the corruption the Watchers had warned about. Holloway's enhancement had twisted him into something that barely qualified as human anymore. His eyes held no empathy, no recognition of others as beings worthy of consideration.
"Sarah Chen," he said, his voice carrying tones that were designed to compel obedience. "I know what you are.
You're a nexus point in the network. Join us willingly, and your friends won't need to suffer."
Sarah felt the psychic pressure he was applying, the way he was trying to force her mind into submission. A month ago, it would have worked instantly. But now, supported by the network of people who had chosen service over selfishness, she found she could resist. "I've seen what you become," she replied calmly. "Power without compassion isn't evolution. It's just sophisticated destruction." What followed wasn't a battle in any conventional sense. Holloway and his followers had abilities that could manipulate matter, could influence minds, could perceive and react to threats with superhuman speed. But they fought as individuals, each one focused on personal advantage and glory. Sarah's network fought as a collective, each person's abilities supporting and amplifying the others. They didn't try to defeat Holloway's group through superior force, but rather by demonstrating a form of coordination and purpose that the corrupted minds simply couldn't match. It was like watching a jazz ensemble compete with a collection of solo musicians. There was no contest. More importantly, their response to the attack proved something crucial to the Watchers. When Holloway's followers were finally subdued, Sarah's network didn't retaliate with cruelty or seek to dominate their fallen opponents.
Instead, they worked to heal the psychic corruption that had twisted these people, recognizing that the true enemy was the misuse of power itself, not the individuals who had fallen victim to it. The healing process was painful and not always successful.
Some of Holloway's followers had become so corrupted that they could no longer function without the constant validation of dominating others. But others, particularly those who had been manipulated rather than truly choosing corruption, began to recover their capacity for empathy and connection.
As night fell on the third day, Sarah received another communication from the Watchers, and for the first time she sensed something that might have been approval. Your network's response was
unexpected. Most species at this stage resort to force against force, creating cycles of escalating violence. You found a third path. We're not perfect, Sarah replied honestly. We barely held together, and there are probably thousands of other groups like Holloway's around the world.
Yes.
But you have demonstrated that another way is possible. This will influence others who are still choosing their path. The outcome remains uncertain, but you have given your species hope. Sarah knew the Watchers were right, but she also knew the hardest tests were still ahead. The next few days would determine whether humanity could overcome its worst impulses and prove worthy of the incredible gifts it was receiving. The fate of her entire species hung in the balance, and she could feel time running out. As she settled down for another night of restless sleep, Sarah carried with her the weight of 7 billion futures. In 4 days, the transformation would be complete, and whatever humanity had become during this trial would be locked in permanently. The question was, would they prove worthy of the power they'd been given, or would they join the long list of species that had failed when tested by the universe itself? The answer would depend on choices made by ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, and Sarah prayed that enough of them would choose wisely. The fourth day dawned with humanity balanced on a knife's edge. Sarah woke to find herself no longer entirely human, at least not in any way the word had previously meant. During the night, her consciousness had expanded beyond the boundaries of her individual mind becoming a focal point for hundreds of thousands of awakening minds across the Pacific Northwest. She could feel their dreams, their fears, their growing understanding that they stood at the threshold of something unprecedented in human history.
But she could also feel the darkness spreading. The corruption the Watchers had warned about was accelerating, creating pockets of twisted consciousness that threatened to tip the entire transformation toward catastrophe. In Seattle, a group of enhanced individuals had begun calling themselves the True Heirs and were systematically subjugating anyone who couldn't match their abilities. In San Francisco, corporate executives were using psychic manipulation to create a new form of slavery, one where the victims believed they were choosing their own oppression.
Most disturbing of all was what was happening in Los Angeles. A charismatic figure known only as The Voice had gathered nearly 1 million followers, creating what appeared to be a paradise of enhanced humans working in perfect harmony. But Sarah could sense the ugly truth beneath the surface. Every follower had been psychically lobotomized, their individual will completely subsumed into The Voice's consciousness. They were no longer truly human, just extensions of a single narcissistic mind.
It's spreading faster than we anticipated, Dr. Vasquez reported during the morning briefing.
Her own transformation had accelerated dramatically, giving her the ability to monitor electromagnetic communications across vast distances. The corrupted networks are actively recruiting promising power and purpose to people who are struggling with their changes.
Emma, now displaying abilities that defied every assumption about child development, provided additional insight that made the situation even more dire. The sad ones are getting louder, she said, her young face grave with understanding beyond her years.
They're scared of being alone with what they're becoming, so they're trying to make everyone else like them. Sarah realized the truth in the child's observation. The corrupted weren't just seeking power, they were seeking validation for their choices, trying to prove that dominance and selfishness were the natural, inevitable response to enhancement.
Every person they recruited justified their own moral compromises. But Emma's comment also revealed something hopeful.
And the good ones? Sarah asked. What are they doing? Building bridges, Emma replied with a smile that somehow held wisdom older than civilization. They're scared too, but they're reaching out instead of grabbing in. This was confirmed as reports came in throughout the day. In communities worldwide, enhanced individuals were creating support networks for those struggling with their transformations. Teachers were developing new educational approaches that help people understand and control their abilities responsibly. Healthcare workers were pioneering treatments for the psychological stress of rapid consciousness expansion. Most remarkably, these positive networks were proving to be more stable and effective than the corrupted hierarchies. While the Voice's followers in Los Angeles were perfectly obedient, they were also increasingly unable to think creatively or adapt to new situations. The True Heirs in Seattle were fracturing into competing sub-factions as their leaders' egos clashed. Power without wisdom was proving to be brittle and self-defeating. It was mid-afternoon when Sarah received the most significant communication yet from the Watchers. The critical threshold approaches. Within the next 24 hours, the balance will tip decisively toward one path or another. Your species' fate hangs on what happens next. What can we do? Sarah asked, feeling the weight of billions of lives in the balance. Nothing directly. This choice must be made freely, by your people, or it has no meaning.
But you should know that you and your network have exceeded our expectations. The question now is whether your example can inspire enough others before it is too late.
The Watchers shared with her a vision that took her breath away. She saw the transformation as they perceived it. A vast web of consciousness covering the entire planet, with nodes of light representing individuals who had chosen service over selfishness, and dark spots representing those who had been corrupted. The web was almost equally balanced between light and shadow, with vast areas still undecided. But she also saw the potential futures branching out from this moment.
In timelines where the corruption won, Earth became a wasteland of competing tyrants, each more twisted than the last, until the planet itself was rendered uninhabitable. In timelines where the light prevailed, humanity became something magnificent, not through dominance, but through collective wisdom and compassion that could heal entire worlds.
The most striking thing about the positive timelines was how they all seemed to hinge on seemingly small choices made by ordinary people. A mother choosing to use her enhanced empathy to heal her community's divisions rather than to manipulate her neighbors. A teenager using telekinetic abilities to help rebuild after disasters rather than to steal what he wanted. A businessman sharing breakthrough insights freely rather than hoarding them for profit. It was then that Sarah understood her true role in this cosmic test. She wasn't meant to save humanity through her own actions, but to serve as a beacon that reminded others of their better natures.
The Watchers weren't looking for perfect beings. They were looking for a species that could choose wisdom over power, service over domination, even when the easier path beckoned. This is the book, it's about history. 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 This is the book, it's about history.
Enhanced individuals across the globe were experiencing what could only be described as a psychic storm. The boundaries between individual minds were becoming permeable, allowing thoughts and emotions to bleed across vast distances.
For the corrupted, this was disaster. Their carefully constructed hierarchies of dominance collapsed as they were forced to experience the pain they had inflicted on others. Many were driven to complete psychotic breaks. But for those who had chosen the path of service, the merging of consciousness was revelation. Sarah found herself experiencing life through thousands of different perspectives simultaneously. A farmer in Kenya celebrating a miraculous harvest, a rescue worker in Japan pulling survivors from earthquake rubble, a teacher in Brazil watching illiterate children suddenly comprehend complex mathematical concepts.
The collective awareness was overwhelming and beautiful and terrible all at once. For the first time in human history, the species was experiencing itself as a unified organism, feeling every triumph and tragedy, every act of love and every moment of cruelty, as if they were all happening to the same person. This global moment of shared consciousness lasted only minutes in objective time, but its effects were immediate and profound.
Across the world, the wavering and undecided finally made their choice. The psychic storm had shown them, beyond any possibility of denial, what both paths ultimately led to.
They had felt the hollow emptiness of the corrupted minds and the joyful fullness of those who had chosen service. The tipping point had been reached.
Sarah could sense it happening like dominoes falling across continents. In Moscow, a powerful enhanced individual who had been building a criminal empire suddenly abandoned his followers and began using his abilities to feed the homeless.
In Mumbai, a group of techno-telepaths who had been manipulating financial markets instead turned their talents toward solving the city's water crisis. In Sao Paulo, enhanced individuals who had been fighting each other for territory joined forces to rescue children from collapsed buildings.
The corrupted networks didn't disappear overnight, but their growth stopped. More crucially, they began to hollow out as their members realized they had been choosing emptiness over abundance, isolation over connection, fear over love. By midnight on the fourth day, the transformation had accelerated beyond all previous rates. Sarah could feel the collective human consciousness crystallizing into something stable, something that would endure. They had passed the test. The Watcher's final communication of the day carried a tone of wonder that transcended species barriers.
In all our observations across 17 galactic cycles, only 4 species have navigated this transformation successfully. Your kind will be the 5th. But more than that, your approach has been unique. The others succeeded through rigid discipline and careful control. You succeeded through love and voluntary cooperation.
This is unprecedented. What happens now? Sarah asked.
Tomorrow, the transformation completes. Your species will join the confluence as full members, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. But you will also retain something the others lost, your essential humanity. We believe this combination may produce something the galaxy has never seen before. As Sarah prepared for sleep on this 4th night, she knew that tomorrow would bring the final phase of humanity's greatest challenge. But for the first time since this incredible journey had begun, she felt confident that her species was ready for whatever came next. They had faced the most fundamental test any intelligent species could encounter: what to do when given unlimited power, and they had chosen wisely. Not perfectly, not without struggle and failure and moments of doubt, but ultimately, they had chosen to remain human in the best sense of the word. Tomorrow would reveal what kind of cosmic citizens humanity would become, but tonight Sarah Chen fell asleep knowing that 7 billion people had looked into the abyss of unlimited power and chosen instead to lift each other up toward the stars. The 5th day began with the sun rising on a world transformed beyond all recognition, yet somehow more human than it had ever been before. Sarah woke to find herself standing in what had once been the Portland Central Library, but which now served as a nexus point for something unprecedented in galactic history. The building itself had been transformed by the collective unconscious of the awakening human species. Walls that had once held books now pulsed with living information, accessible to any enhanced mind that needed knowledge. The space had become larger than its physical dimensions should have allowed, as if reality itself was bending to accommodate humanity's expanding consciousness. But the most remarkable change was in the people. Sarah could see with senses that had no name in any human language,
the transformation that had taken place overnight. Every human being on Earth now existed simultaneously as an individual consciousness and as part of a vast interconnected network.
They retained their personal identities, their unique perspectives and dreams, but they could also access the collective wisdom and experience of the entire species when needed. It was exactly what the Watchers had said was impossible.
"Your kind continues to surprise us," came the familiar voice of the Confluence entities, but now Sarah could perceive them directly. They stood before her as beings of pure consciousness, their forms shifting between geometric patterns and something almost resembling the idea of light itself.
Never before has a species maintained individual identity while achieving collective consciousness. The other successful transformations required the sacrifice of self for the greater whole. Sarah found she could now communicate as an individual, as part of the human collective, or as a bridge between the two. "We didn't want to lose ourselves," she replied. "We wanted to become more than we were, while still being who we are." The lead watcher, though hierarchy was perhaps the wrong word for beings whose consciousness overlapped and flowed like music, projected what Sarah understood as profound curiosity. "Show us what this means."
What happened next would be remembered across the galaxy for eons to come. Sarah opened her awareness to include Emma, now standing beside her with the easy confidence of a child who had always been exactly where she belonged.
Together they reached out to the human network, not to control or direct, but to invite participation in something that had never been attempted before. Within moments, 7 billion human minds joined in a collective demonstration of their species' new nature. But instead of losing their individuality in the merger, each person became more themselves than they had ever been. A musician in Vienna found her compositions enhanced by the mathematical insights of physicists worldwide. A farmer in Ghana discovered agricultural techniques that combined with urban planning concepts from architects in Tokyo and environmental science from researchers in the Amazon. The Watchers observed something that challenged every assumption they had about consciousness, power, and evolution. Humanity wasn't using their enhanced abilities to dominate or control, nor were they subsiding their individual wills to a collective mind. Instead, they had created something entirely new, a species that could think and act both as individuals and as a unified consciousness, switching between modes as easily as changing focus from near to far. This should not be possible, the Watchers admitted, their communication tinged with what Sarah recognized as awe. Individual consciousness and collective awareness are mutually exclusive. Every law of psychic development, every model we have developed across millions of years says that a species must choose one or the other. Maybe that's why it took humans to figure out a third option, Emma said with the directness that only children possess.
"We're really good at doing things that shouldn't work." The Watchers were silent for a long moment, and Sarah could sense them consulting with the broader confluence, sharing humanity's achievement with beings across the galaxy.
When they returned their attention to Earth, their communication carried a weight of implication that made Sarah's enhanced consciousness real.
You have done something that will change everything.
Not just for your species, but for all consciousness in this galaxy. You have proven that the fundamental assumptions we have operated under for millions of years are incomplete. What does that mean? Sarah asked. It means that we, the confluence, must also evolve. For eons, we have guided younger species through their transformations based on our own experience. But your path suggests possibilities we never considered. You will not simply join the confluence, you will help us become something greater than what we have been. Over the following hours, Sarah witnessed the true scope of humanity's transformation.
Across the globe, problems that had seemed intractable for centuries were being solved in real time by networks of enhanced individuals working in perfect coordination. Climate change was being addressed through innovations that combined insights from atmospheric scientists, engineers, economists, and social organizers in ways that no single discipline could have achieved alone.
In hospitals, doctors were performing miracle healings by combining their enhanced diagnostic abilities with the experiences of patients worldwide who had faced similar conditions. Teachers were creating educational approaches that adapted moment by moment to the needs of individual students while simultaneously drawing on the collective knowledge of every educator on Earth. But perhaps most remarkably, the transformation was healing humanity's deepest wounds. Sarah watched through the global network as former enemies sat down together, their enhanced empathy making it impossible to maintain hatred when they could literally feel each other's pain and hope.
The enhanced consciousness didn't eliminate conflict, but it made it impossible to dehumanize opponents when you could experience their perspective directly. It was in the afternoon that Sarah finally understood why the Watchers had been so amazed by humanity's achievement, and why it represented something that other species found terrifying.
The revelation came when she attempted to perceive the broader galactic community through her enhanced senses. What she discovered was shocking. Every other member of the confluence, despite their incredible advancement, was fundamentally limited in ways that humanity was not. The Keithanari, who had developed perfect social harmony, had sacrificed all individual creativity and innovation. They were peaceful and wise, but they couldn't adapt to truly new challenges.
The Morale, who had mastered the balance between ability and responsibility, were locked into rigid patterns of thought that made them predictable and ultimately stagnant. Even the Watchers themselves, for all their power and knowledge, were constrained by their own success. They had become so focused on maintaining the stability they had achieved that they had lost the capacity for the kind of radical innovation that humanity had just demonstrated. "We have been gardeners for so long," the lead Watcher admitted when Sarah shared her observations, "that we forgot how to be seeds." Humanity's unique achievement wasn't just solving the problem of balancing individual and collective consciousness. It was proving that it was possible to transform without losing the essential chaos and unpredictability that drove evolution and growth.
Other species had achieved power through discipline and control. Humans had achieved it through organized spontaneity, structured creativity, and disciplined wildness.
This was what truly terrified advanced civilizations about humanity.
Not their potential for destruction, many species had that. Not their capacity for rapid adaptation, others possessed that as well.
What was genuinely frightening was humanity's ability to evolve and grow stronger without losing the fundamental unpredictability that had driven their evolution in the first place. As the fifth day progressed toward evening, Sarah received one final communication from the Watchers, but this time it came in the form of a formal invitation from the entire confluence.
Humanity is hereby invited to join the confluence, not as students or junior members, but as teachers and innovators. Your species will help guide the next phase of galactic consciousness development.
But more than that, you will help us remember what we have forgotten about growth, change, and the courage to become something new. The invitation came with a warning and a choice.
Joining the confluence would mean taking responsibility for countless other species and civilizations. It would mean becoming guardians of life and consciousness across entire galactic sectors. It would mean accepting that humanity's actions would ripple across space and time in ways that could not be predicted or controlled. The choice was offered to every human simultaneously, and the response was as uniquely human as everything else they had accomplished.
Instead of a simple yes or no, humanity's answer was a question. Can we make a counteroffer? What humanity proposed was unprecedented in galactic history. Instead of simply joining the existing confluence, it suggested creating something new, a partnership that would combine the stability and wisdom of the established civilizations with humanity's capacity for innovation and adaptation.
The negotiations that followed lasted only hours in real time, but involved millions of years' worth of accumulated galactic wisdom being evaluated against humanity's radically different approach to consciousness and evolution. The final agreement was signed as the impossible sky of the fifth day began to fade back towards something approaching normal. Humanity would become not just members of the confluence, but co-founders of what became known as the New Synthesis, a galactic community dedicated not just to preserving consciousness and civilization, but to perpetually revolutionizing and improving them. As Sarah stood in the transformed library, watching the stars return to their familiar patterns while knowing that humanity's relationship with those stars would never be the same, she reflected on the incredible journey her species had completed. They had faced the ultimate test of any intelligent species, what to do when granted the power of gods, and they had responded in the most human way possible. They had refused to choose between the options presented to them, and had instead created a third path that no one had imagined possible.
The Watchers had been right to be terrified of humanity's potential, not because humans were uniquely disruptive or chaotic, but because they represented something that challenged every assumption about the limits of consciousness and the nature of evolution itself.
Emma appeared beside Sarah. As the last of the alien architecture faded from the library, the building slowly returning to its original form, while retaining subtle enhancements that would serve the community for generations to come. "So what happens now?" the child asked, though her question carried depths that would take lifetimes to explore fully.
Sarah smiled, feeling the vast network of human consciousness humming contentedly in the back of her awareness, ready to be called upon when needed but never overwhelming her individual thoughts. "Now we get to find out what happens when humans become responsible for the galaxy," she said.
"I suspect it's going to be interesting."
Above them, the stars shone with familiar light, but Sarah knew that humanity's journey among them was just beginning. They had proven that it was possible to gain unlimited power without losing essential humanity. Now they would discover what that combination could accomplish when applied to the infinite challenges and opportunities waiting among the stars. The Watchers had been right to be afraid of humanity's untapped strength. But they had also been wise enough to recognize that sometimes, the thing you fear most is exactly what the universe needs to become something greater than anyone had dared to imagine. What terrifies everyone most about humans? Their untapped strength. HFY Stories.